Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Leadership Launchpad's Pick and Mix podcast. And this is a very, very special episode and a very different episode because I have literally, and I apologize to everybody else who I know in the educational world, but my two favorite people in the whole of education, including the people I probably work with. So apologies for that. But if you're watching on the screen, you've already seen Sam Gibbs and Tracy Goodyear. And if you've heard me speak at any point, these ladies have had an incredible influence on me in the last maybe 3 years. And I like to joke that this podcast even existing and the Launchpad books even existing are their fault, because they've given me they gave me the confidence to even go with it. So thanks, ladies. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Hi, Chris.
Wow. The other thing that we've got between us is a super high sense of psychological safety in that you ladies do not, I was going to say girls then, I don't know where we go, girls or ladies, but you don't hold back, and I love that. And so even the idea of doing this, I've passed it by you and you said that it's not a terrible idea, so we're going with it. The reason for saying that it's a special episode of the Launchpad podcast is that we're flipping the format. So I am going to be the guest and Tracy and Sam are going to kind of be the hosts. So for the 50th edition, we're going to kind of hear a little bit about my story, which feels a little bit self-indulgent, but again, I'm told that it's okay.
Yeah, we've approved it, Chris, so it's fine.
You've pre-approved it, so that's good. It's taken us about half an hour to press record because we've just been laughing and joking offline. And so who knows whether we'll be able to stick with the script, but we're going to...
And although we've pre-approved it, just to say if it goes wrong, it's completely your fault.
Oh, of course, yeah, I'll take full blame. And of course, if it's really bad, it'll never see the light of day. Okay, well, let's get started then. So, Sam, you're going to ask the first question, aren't you?
I am, yeah. Should we just, we'll get straight in, but should probably just start by saying congratulations on the podcast, Chris, because to get to 50 episodes is pretty phenomenal. And I think, am I right in saying that I was your first guest?
You're absolutely the first. Now, we have to caveat with that Tracy was growing a young person, a new person at the time.
I don't take offence, don't worry.
Are you saying she would have been yes, because this could all
God, that's awkward. That is awkward.
We're about collaboration, not competition, Chris.
Of course we are.
This is everything.
Absolutely. Yeah. Hashtag humility, one of our values. I think we should start with the questions now before this goes completely off course. So are you ready, Chris?
I'm ready.
For question number 1. Okay. So I want you to imagine a dinner party.
Okay.
Which you are the host.
Right.
Given your choice of anybody, apart from me and Tracy, of course, dead or alive, who would you want to invite? Who would be your number 1 guest and why?
All right. Well, like most guests, I kind of racked my brain about whether I was going to go like super posh and invite some sort of historical figure that I could learn lots of things from, or just some kind of, person who I thought was interesting. And this one's a bit controversial because I would choose Lance Armstrong. And most people would take a sharp intake of breath if you know who he is. He is the kind of Tour de France cyclist who basically cheated and took drugs to win every single one of his 7 kind of Tour de France titles. And the reason I would invite him is that period of him winning those 7 titles was proper pivotal kind of in my life. It was like 19 years old till sort of 26. And I was obsessed with him because obviously at that point we thought it was real. He literally was like my hero at the time, to the point that I had, wait for it, a plaque on my wall, wait for it, in front of my bike that I used to cycle on in the garage. Sam, if you can see Sam, she's holding in the giggles here. And it had like a picture and it had like a yellow jersey and all kinds of stuff. And I was literally obsessed. And because I didn't watch a lot of cycling apart from that, every summer was this highlight. And of course, he kept winning and winning and winning. I read his book and I used to wear the Livestrong yellow band and everything. I was completely obsessed. And then, of course, when we found out that it was all a lie, like most people, I just was going like, oh. And I wanted to well, thanks for that. Like, you absolutely destroyed one of my heroes, sort of thing. So I kind of want to invite him to say, dude, what were you thinking? And there was one thing to cheat, but like, if you know anything about his story, he didn't just cheat, but like, he literally destroyed anybody who went up against him and said that he was like taking drugs. He kind of destroyed a huge load of careers and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, that's who I would, invite. Tracy, you're going to say something.
I was just going to say, would be a good opportune moment to give the plaque back as well.
Well, exactly, or smash it over his head, maybe.
Still got it.
The only other link to that story, which is mildly amusing, I told someone the other day and they loved it, was when I was back in, like, I think it was 2009, I was sort of doing lots of stuff in e-learning, and I got invited to this posh event in London. And I was proper, as you can tell by the accent, proper country boy. And so I was like, oh, London, oh. First time I ever heard the word canapé. I was like, okay, right, what's that then? And I remember, I looked it up, sort of, what is that thing? Oh, you can eat it. Right. And I remember looking on the kind of board where it told you where you were sit, like in a wedding. And I was sat on the same table as the vice president of Dell, like the computer company. And I thought, oh man, that's cool. I wonder if I can get to talk to him. So as I walk in to kind of take my seat, I look around and no one else is there, but I'm already at the table. And I noticed that I'm sat on the other side of the table from him. And it's a big old table. And I thought, oh, what a shame. Never mind. I turned around and still nobody was in the room. So I just switched the name tags so that I'd be sat next to the guy from Dell. I thought, is that bad? Oh, who cares? So anyway. So this guy sits down. The link's coming, don't worry. We're chit-chatting and all this sort of stuff. And he said, what are you into? And I said, well, cycling. I said, well, I'm a bit obsessed with Lance Armstrong. He said, oh, yeah. I know Lance. We go out cycling sometimes. And I was like, what the hell? So then I was just like, this is amazing. In a weird way, I was like, right, so if I bump into you, I've touched you, you've probably touched Lance. So that means I'm like one step away from having kind of physical contact with Lance Armstrong. And so the dinner went on. And then the craziest thing happened. He sort of gestured over to this person in the corner, and this kind of guy scuttles over, and it turns out to be his assistant. And he just says, Chris, what are you doing tomorrow? And I said, I don't know, I'm going to bet. Like, that was what it was kind of linked to. And he said, get Chris on the executive panel for tomorrow's bet conference. And can you get him he needs an XP68 and a GP42. Chris, just take, they're two of our newest models of computer. Take them back and play around with them in school if you want, and just let us know what you think. And so there you go. I literally walked out with like 2 new computers and a space at bet.
I mean, I'm forming this picture of you, Chris, as kind of the Pip from Great Expectations of education, sort of emerging into this world where, adults let you down, you have to learn what a canapé is, you're mixing with your London, and then you basically come good at the end of it.
Wow. I wish I could understand what that even means, but I don't even know who Pip is.
The English teacher.
The English teachers all love that.
Probably loving it, yes.
Right.
A reference for them.
Right, let's keep moving on. Tracy, it's your turn.
Well, it is, but I just want to take that question back a little bit, because you did something wrong to make something right.
Oh.
Right. Would that have happened if you hadn't have switched the name tags?
That's true. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, there's a sliding doors moment in there. Well,
have you tried it since, that strategy?
No, I haven't been invited. I haven't been invited to anywhere with a canapé.
It's because you're universally known as the guy who switches the name tags. That's why we all know your trick.
So watch out for the next conference.
Yeah. So hope we're doing this right, by the way, Chris. This is a lot of pressure for us on the podcast. But as you know, on the podcast, all 50 of them, you talk about these ignition points, these events or moments in your life that have really made a difference, shaped your thinking, or caused some sort of transformation in your life. So can you talk us through your ignition point 1, which you've named Mr. Money? Tell us about that.
Yeah. I just need to grab this. No, I won't grab it. So this is, again, it's linked to school. So this guy, Mr. Money, he was the head of 6th form at my school. And again, I haven't really told this story before, but I come from a very, I suppose it is typical, sadly, low aspirations, low academic kind of achievement family. Like no one had ever been to university, all those sorts of stereotypical things. And I was very good at sport and not particularly confident academically, and just followed sport. And my dad used to fix TVs. He was like a TV engineer. And so I thought, I want to be able to like my dad, but I can't fix TVs, so I'm going to fix cookers. Right? So I'm going to work for British Gas, and I'm going to be a gas man. Fine, sorted. And this guy, Mr. Money, basically kind of, called me into his office and said at one point, "Are you going to carry on do A levels?" And I said, "No, it's not for me." And back and forth, he almost forced me to do A levels. And so I did some A levels, didn't do particularly well at those. And then again, the next conversation happened. He called me and said, "You're going to go to university?" And I said, "Nope, no one's ever been, not going to happen." And again, back and forth. And he kind of, semi-forced me to kind of go to university. And then another time, I, again, very kind of sheltered kind of travel. I've never been out of the UK, all that sort of stuff. He said, "You want to go to one of these American summer camps?" And I was like, that sounds a bit scary, chit chat. Of course, again, he pushed me into it. So I went and did this summer camp in America, which then led to 6 years of traveling around the world and doing summer camp and stuff, which of course then led to all kinds of crazy things. And so effectively, this guy, Mr. Money, is kind of the ignition point for that early part of my life. And I can almost track most things back to that one guy. And the crazy story is that the other book that I wrote off the back of the doctorate is called Confident Leaders by Design. And it's about confidence, and it's kind of semi-autobiographical, my growth in confidence. And of course, when I was writing the book, at the end of it, the publishers usually push you and you say, "Oh, who are you going to dedicate the book to?" Now, I haven't been diagnosed with any condition, but I'm definitely got some social awkwardness and, don't really read social situations particularly well. So it never dawned on me that I should dedicate it to my wife and children. So I dedicated it to Mr. Money, right? This book, which has got me in untold amounts of trouble with my wife and family ever since, right? And again, in a sort of unhelpful way, I've said, no, I wouldn't dedicate a book on confidence to you lot, would I? You've done nothing but erode my confidence. But the end of the story, and we were committed to sticking this to 50 minutes. 2 weeks ago, I'm going to put this on LinkedIn later, I went to Mr. Money's house to give him a copy of the book. My old post-16 teacher and another teacher came as well. And it's going to start me off already on the old crying, but his son sadly died recently. And there was a delay in me being able to go around because he's grieving, and he still is grieving, sadly. But when I was around there, I was thinking, keep it together. It was all very jovial, and we're talking about all the good times and all this thing. Anyway, he asked to kind of for me to sign the book, which was weird. And he left the room to get a pen. And his wife looks at me in streams of tears and just says, "You don't realise how much this means to him." Right. Of course, that set me off. And then for the next sort of 15 minutes, it was just this sort of flood fest of tears. But yeah, and the reason for saying it is that I'm sure, most of us in education can look back on a teacher who literally changed our lives. And it just really brought home to me, how crazy this job is and how you literally are changing lives.
Yeah. Oh, what brilliant reflections, really profound reflections, actually. And I think we've often spoken, all together, all three of us have spoken about these kind of pass the baton moments, these moments of, in being education, we have the obligation, imperative to carry on passing the baton. And when you're lucky enough to revisit some aspect of that, I think that's the greatest professional privilege, isn't it? Is that, one day somebody will come and do the same for you because you've passed the baton on through history. That's really, really powerful. And yeah, how much must it have meant to your teacher to see you? That's incredible.
It's cool. I was late as well. I thought I was going to get a detention. I was late to the meeting. I thought he was going to tell me off.
And even better, you're still actually married to your wife. So that's a story that
so far, yeah.
The book. Yeah,
the next in my head, I'm like, right, next book, dedicate.
Yes,
we'll
remind it on your laptop.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you remind me, please.
We'll check.
Anyway, this is the bit. I'm looking forward to this next bit.
Yeah. So you've chosen one of the launch pads, Chris, from your own book, and there might have been somebody else here with an accent more appropriate for telling listeners, as it you, and then second Tracy, least of all from the Midlands, me. And that will become abundantly clear to listeners when I ask you if you could please tell us why you selected Launchpad 1, which is called Lead Like a Farmer.
That was pretty good.
Unrehearsed.
That was
very good.
Yeah.
Well, again, for those that are new to the podcast, this bit typically we talk through. The guests pick 2 launch pads from the books that we kind of kind of explain what I was thinking when I made it, and then we ask people why it resonates with them. And so I get to pick the ones that I don't know if I like them most, but I thought this one was very apt. Although randomly, Bristol's not particularly full of farms. I don't know where the accent comes from. I don't live near a farm. I've never been on a farm. But hey, let's embrace it anyway. So I was kind of playing around with this idea that maybe leaders could learn a lot from the farming process. And so to stretch this analogy a little bit, I started looking at what the actual farming process is. And they say that the first step in the farming process is planning. And so naturally I started thinking, yeah, that's true. Leaders do need to dedicate, considerable time and energy into kind of defining the vision and the strategy, and then building a team, and then maybe kind of, assessing the resource requirements. Now, the second bit of the farming process apparently is called soil preparation. And I thought, oh, okay. Yeah, there's a bit of a link there, this idea of cultivating a culture. Thinking about kind of the enabling conditions that have got to be in place for things to thrive. Maybe thinking about what we would call active ingredients. What are the things I have to protect going forward in order to make sure this works? And then, of course, making sure that you've built up staff capacities and the capabilities, which, as people know, are absolutely core to what me, Tracy and Sam kind of do with the Trustwide CPD network. So then it sort of I thought, okay, let's see how far this goes, whether it does sort of line in. And of course, then you get the planting bit of the farming process. And I thought maybe that's to do with allocating resources and making sure that the right people are in the right places. But also maybe a bit about kind of being quite methodical and systematic about maybe implementation. The fourth one is cultivation, which sadly, when I was writing it, I thought, oh, that might be one of the ones we're most poor at, this idea of, once we've done some professional development, not thinking that that's the end of the story, that actually, learning is one step, but, support is another. And so I thought about this idea of kind of having to maximize kind of the monitoring for leaders to remove obstacles, to provide autonomy, kind of, fostering creativity and stuff like that. And then the analogy basically finishes with this idea of harvesting, which I thought, I'm not sure where to go with this, but basically the idea of celebrating success and achievements, trying to extract as much learning from any failures that we might have, and sharing kind of insights that we've got both internally and then as we do with the kind of the CPD network, trying to extend that so that other people can learn from it. And then the last one it's called storage. And I think the analogy falls apart there, but maybe this idea of not losing what we've learnt is an interesting idea about storing and kind of integrating that into the culture and the systems so that we build a kind of sustainable level of success. So that was kind of what I was thinking when I made it. Do you think it's got any links?
Oh yeah, I mean we talk a lot, don't we, in our network with our members about this idea of fertile ground,
Right.
and we've been talking about that a lot. There's a lot of change coming our way, isn't there, in terms of like the white paper. We've just had the curriculum and assessment review. There's all manner of things coming, and it's to what extent are schools ready to implement that change? And we have fallen into, haven't we? Probably particularly more of last year's rushing to solutions and rushing to do things and activity and implement strategies and do and do more. But as your analogy, suggests, none of that is going to be sustainable. To extent of the plants are not going to grow and bloom if the soil isn't fertile. And that's really hard in schools. It's really hard because everyone's so busy. The system is so stretched. It can feel like a luxury, can't it, to spend time tending to the soil. People just want to start planting the seeds straight away, and then start to measure how high they're growing as quickly as possible. But we've learned time and time again that things just are not effective and don't work and don't last. And at what cost when we rush to do all the busy things. So yeah, I think that analogy is really pertinent, particularly at the moment. And that's the question we should all be asking ourselves: how fertile is the ground, and how well have we tended to it?
I think that's really powerful. Just to add to that, I think that storage one is the one that's most interesting for me. Is that actually in our want to be as agile as possible through, the types of changes and challenges that we experience in education, sometimes that can come at the cost of professional expertise and understanding. Now, I always remember sitting in the hall, where some teachers who've been teaching 35, 40 years, whatever, making their leaving speeches and feeling a real deep sense of, I don't feel like I got everything I needed to be a better teacher from those colleagues. And then it's just lost from the profession. So, and we often talk about this in the network, how do we harvest that expertise and mean that we're consistently growing our organisational wisdom, but also our professional wisdom in terms of what we go on to learn. And if you do an experiment and look at all of the years and hours of experience that exist within your own school, that's significant. Yeah. And all of those hours of learning, we're at risk of losing that, or it just being drained from the system, when actually that's where the real power lies, if we harness it and store it in the right way, I think.
Yeah, nice.
And I think that leads to a lot of staff feeling who've been teaching a long time, that things come in cycles, and it's that again. And to what extent do we decide what those new things are going to be and involve colleagues that have been through these processes before in our thinking about what we do next? Because that can lead to them feeling really undervalued and like they've got nothing to contribute to that. And joining up that loop, I think is better for everybody, because you genuinely move on having learned the lessons of the past, but you do that with the people that have been through those processes before, and then they feel valued. We've got to get much better at
that. I think so. Yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah, and I think something you said, Sam, there, that I've been using this phrase, and it's the first chapter in the confidence book, this idea that you can't cheat the harvest. You can't expect in the summer to just pull up plants, healthy plants, if you haven't done all of the things before, And I think it's quite a scary time, isn't it? That we can't expect to have thriving, flourishing, to want to use, teachers, if we haven't done all of the things to support that.
And that's, I'm going to go crazy on the gardening analogy, but there's a weather that we're trying to weather, as well as the quality of the soil, or as Sam said, how fertile is that ground for optimum growth for the future, and there's tending to the plants that have already grown, and there's tending to the seedlings that haven't come up yet, isn't there? And it's that fine. Well, over it now. I love a gardening analogy, but at what point do you tip that balance? And sometimes disproportionately, we're too busy spraying the plants that have got, that we're trying to intervene with things when we haven't really thought carefully enough about the conditions for growth in the first place.
we're fighting against human nature, aren't we, the whole time? We want things to happen quickly. We're not very good at waiting for things. We were talking just before we pressed record, Chris, weren't we, about my upcoming running event, me about my training or lack of. And it's, until you said that just then, I was like fully under the illusion that I was going to just rock up in 2 weeks and be able to run 13 point whatever it is miles, having not done a load of training. But, I don't really want to because it's January and it's really cold and I don't want to do the work that I need to start 10 weeks ago in order for
but you want the result.
Yeah, basically. But, last week, to go back to the analogy, my garden is not going to be flourishing. I might survive, and that's probably a bit of
Amazing. Well, we will. I think when we publish this, we'll put the time. Should we? We'll put the half marathon time in the blurb.
It should flash up.
I'm thinking no. Nobody thinks that information. I think we should rapidly move on to the next question.
Let's
move
move
back to
on.
Tracy.
Let's move in. Okay, so the next question. This is a really tricky and challenging one. I imagine it won't have an easy answer, but as you mentioned before, complete psychological safety in this room for sure. But the next question you've chosen is, what is your most terrible memory?
Yeah, and we'll keep laughing so that I don't I don't cry through this whole thing. But effectively, one of the reasons I set up the podcast was to get a bit behind the scenes with leaders, because I think it does loads of things, doesn't it? I don't think it helps for people to see whether we call ourselves successful, but to see successful people as kind of invulnerable and all that sort of stuff, and somehow. And I wanted to get behind the stories. And since doing the podcast, you learn about all of these crazy things that these seemingly perfect people have gone through, and there's a bit of, well, again, to use that word humility is useful, but I think it builds connection as well, because most of us have gone through stuff and continue to go through stuff. And when I was picking the questions, I didn't go too deep, too dark. And then I had a guest this morning who chose this question. And so I thought I'd switch in the moment, which is potentially challenging. But anyway, so I've probably got lots of bad memories. But to share one with people that stands out probably as the most terrible, and I might have told Tracy and Sam before this, but we moved into our house. So I've got two children, one who's 14 now and one who's 12. But about 4 years ago, in the house that we moved into, we had like a brick-built shed in the garden, and it was just full of junk, and it continued to be full of junk for years and years. It was quite a substantial sort of thing. Anyway, my daughter at some point, it was always a plan to knock it down. And my daughter said, we should knock it down on my 9th birthday, and then we could spend a year building something, and then we could have the party for my 10th birthday in it. I thought, that's a great idea. And, any kind of chance to get the kids involved. And we had a fireman in our street who we're really friendly with, and our kids are similar ages. And somehow it was in the summer, and we dreamt up this idea that we would me and him would knock it down, and then we'd have like the garden's quite large, so we had to kind of like, everyone else would sit way back and have like, I don't know, a barbecue or something while the dads knocked this thing down, and then blah, blah, blah. And so that was the plan. And so me and this guy kind of, we start taking this apart and all these sorts of things. And we get to the last bit, and effectively, not to bore people, but the way that he sort of showed us how to do it is you kind of take the sides down, you prop up the roof, and then you basically knock the front wall down, which leaves just the roof on these two props, and then you stand out the way, and then the rest of it collapses. So we got to that position, and this front wall was kind of like swinging in the wind, like it would have taken just a finger to push it down. And so in that moment, in what now I know as a kind of a moment of stupidity, said, hey, let's get all the family inside and we'll take a photo. And you can see where this is probably going to go, but effectively all the family came in. So my kids were 10 and 7, maybe something like that. And I for the kind of the picture, pushed this front wall just a little bit to show it was wobbling, and it caught on the guttering, which I couldn't see on the outside, and it pulled the whole house down on the family. And of course, I couldn't see what happened. I can only assume what happened, but we're talking like the roof, the whole breeze block back wall, everything. And so the next maybe 35 minutes is a bit of a blur in my mind. There was lots of screaming, lots of kind of rushing around. My friend's, the fireman's wife is a paramedic. So, silver linings, there were all the right people were in the right place. Do you know what I mean? So suddenly, again, to finish the story, I suppose, my daughter had some facial kind of scratches and injuries and some cuts and stuff like that. My wife twisted her ankle and I seemingly got away with it without anything. But my son severed his urethra, which, I'm not much of a scientist, but, you're kind of, it's your pee tube, but with no external damage, which is interesting, So we get to hospital, and effectively, why it's my most terrible memory is this kind of realization that a decision I had made had led to this. And after that, people would try to kind of take that responsibility away, oh no, but it was an accident, and all in the right way to try and save me from the guilt, I suppose. But then you're thrust into the situation where, I remember vividly, like, the doctors not being able to hide their almost disgust at what we had done, because the story got told to them that we had pulled our family into a dangerous situation, and the doctors just going, like, what were you thinking? And then being in front of the social services and all of the sort of systems you have to go through and that sort of stuff. And so, yeah, that night was tricky, and just it lives as the most terrible memory. And then, of course, I had this weird situation where my wife stayed in. It was close to COVID, so my wife stayed in the hospital with the children. But to save them from any sort of further pain, I had to come back and then clear up the garden. So I'm like sifting through these rocks and breeze blocks, and there's ripped clothes and all kinds of stuff going on, and it was crazy. The good news is, after lots of trips to Great Ormond Street, they fixed my son. You would never know anything of it. You would literally be like, oh my God, that guy, he plays kind of Division 1 football. He's a rugby star. He's a maths genius, all these sorts of things. My daughter sometimes, when we bring it up, says, yeah, do you think we should have taken like a fake photo? And I'm like, oh yeah, that would have been a good idea. Do you know what I mean? And so, yeah, not to kind of, just put a bit of a positive spin on it, I suppose, afterwards. But yeah, that was probably stands as the terrible memory.
Yeah, completely understand why.
Tricky.
Isn't it interesting through the eyes of childhood? It can be so candid.
Yeah, it was almost like a bit of levity,
Yeah.
And I think there's, anything that involves your children being hurt is everybody's worst nightmare. Because if I was to pick my worst memory, it would also be around my son getting hurt. And although, obviously totally different scenario, he broke his femur bone and ended up in hospital, and there was a whole chain of events after that. My guilt afterwards was, why had I not known? Because he'd been complaining that his leg was hurting. And I said, children whinge all the time because they don't want to go on walks or they don't want to do things. And I had more or less completely dismissed it. Now, whether that would have changed anything, because in the end, he basically tripped over somebody's foot and fell on a playground, and his femur bone snapped in half. But I thought it was so lucky that he was just in the playground and he wasn't somewhere. We'd been on a sit wire thing the week before. My daughter's birthday. If he'd done it then, so then you go through, but this could have happened, and you then think all things that could have been even worse, and then it comes back to, what should I have done? I think that's just human nature, isn't it? And particularly, for someone that you love, you go over and over and over your own role in it. But thankfully, in both situations, everybody's okay. Yep. And thank God for the NHS.
Absolutely that.
Absolutely.
And it's worth I don't know where I got the clarity from. Straight after, I knew that I was going to struggle with this. And so I just put my hand up for help almost the day after. And I just said, look, I'm going to struggle with this. I need some sort of counselling or something straight away. I'm not bottling this up. I'm not holding any tears in. I'm not going to try and hide from the guilt or the response. I'm just going to lean straight into it. And I think that's probably what helped me get through reasonably unscathed.
Yeah. I think that's a really powerful reflection, isn't it? It's about how many people carry whatever burden it might be of guilt, or it doesn't matter really, grief or whatever it is, but actually that reluctance to ask for help when you know actually it's staring you in the face that that's exactly what you need. Actually, the most natural thing feels like to kind of revert to being more insular and just being by yourself or isolating yourself, but actually doing the opposite is the right thing.
Yeah.
And changing that narrative is really important, isn't it?
And just to make people laugh, so we can move on with the positivity. My son, right, now says, I don't know, he's using it. If he basically says, if he gets hurt, so are you all right? He says, look, a house didn't fall on me, so yeah, I'm fine. It's almost that's his
family language.
that's his ceiling now. If he gets hurt and it didn't involve a house falling on him, then yeah, he can.
Do you know what? That's probably his version of his therapy. That's probably his version of how he copes with it and deals with it. I mean, my son does a similar thing. He sort of minimises the whole thing now,
right.
But that's how he's sort of been able to, almost like made a joke out of it. But yeah, there's so there, isn't there, about as Tracy said, how you process things. And I think in schools, which is obviously where we're all working and thinking about leadership, there is a tendency just for leaders to keep things in, to not ask for help, to try and be the superhero, the one that saves everybody and fixes everybody. And we talk a lot, don't we, about, and I know you do work in this space, Chris, where do head teachers go? Where do leaders go for their own supervision? And again, that's another thing that can feel like a luxury. But it's so important, particularly in the context of working in now, to have people like this. We all benefit from this on screen today, but off screen as well. A kind of relationship that's psychologically safe and people that kind of listen and you can process things. And everybody should have that, professionally and personally. So,
all right.
Yeah, let's go straight into then, now that we've given the listeners some free therapeutic advice, and let's go straight to Launchpad 2. And for this one, you have chosen Clear the Path for Others. Tell us about that.
So this one, again, is slightly autobiographical in that I've realised over time that I am unhealthily self-centered. I'm not sure where it comes from. Probably, that'll be another story. But I'm not selfish in that I would give my time and energy and I'm professionally generous and all those sorts of things. But I genuinely do have myself at the center of my life. And so I think I've had that almost as a negative side of my leadership. So when I sort of read about this, I thought, that's really interesting. But this idea that maybe a leader's success shouldn't be measured in their success, but should be measured in their team's success, and that sort of leaning into this idea that this is probably a mindset that you have to have, starting with this idea that if you're in a leadership role, you're in a role of service, that the best leaders enter situations with a focus on the needs and the wants of others. They see themselves, as their role as in service of others. This idea that it's about this mindset of preparation, that you're always thinking, okay, begin with the end in mind. What can I do to smooth that kind of path for people? And then, of course, there's this sort of mindset of loyalty, that there's a deep, deep commitment to the team and the organization. But more than that, I think, and this is where and I've been practicing it kind of proactively for maybe the last year, is this idea of, okay, but how do you demonstrably show that? You want to be was it a servant leader or whatever it is, but what is it? And I remember vividly in the Trustwide CPD network, we had helped me out with the name, putting staff first. Johnny Utley.
Yeah.
We had Johnny Utley come and speak, and before I'd met him, I'd kind of seen the book and heard the idea of put staff first, and I thought, oh yeah, it's a nice kind of sentiment. But when he came, I was amazed by the really explicit, kind of tangible ways that he does do that. And so this is kind of semi-inspired by that, really. This idea of what are you actually doing to clear the path? And if you're looking at the image, you can see this idea of almost sweeping away barriers and financial restrictions and time. And so the first one being kind of reducing red tape, for want of a better word, but kind of, I don't know why this, I think I seem to have got the wrong stuff on here, so I can explain it in a bit more detail, but the idea of kind of removing any bureaucracy that's there, what is it that's stopping your team from achieving their goal, and to see that as your job, really. You are literally clearing the path for them to be able to achieve it. I stumbled over this word rumble strips, which was interesting. It's sort of, like on a road, you have these sort of traffic calming things which tell you, like slow down, and it's almost like you have to slow down, you're getting close to the roundabout. But this idea of maybe revealing the rumble strips, what is it that might trip people up as they go through a project? And then the last one being kind of shining a spotlight, this idea that really our job is not to take the spotlight, it is to shine it on other people. And you might have sensed the kind of trepidation in my voice as I realised that I hope these mistakes on the image didn't make it to the final book. But
check for if you like.
No, not live, that would be embarrassing. But yeah, so that's what I was thinking when I made that one. Is there anything in that, you think?
There's loads there, Chris. And I was thinking about what we were saying at the beginning around fertile ground. And that is about logistical and operational preparation, but it's also about values, isn't it? And I think this is one thing we've really become clear to us through the network is actually your values and how you want to behave and the people you align yourself with and what you want things to look like. The values, to be cheesy about it, your values are your guiding star, aren't they? And that idea of kind of spelling things out, what you want and what you don't want to see are equally important. And like you, that session we had that Johnny did with us around ethical leadership and what we mean by that has been hugely influential in our trust because we've developed our own version of that charter that underpins everything we do in the same way that our values in the network, curiosity, humility, generosity, they're a way to hold people and yourself to account for how you behave. And when we talk about developing teams and developing people and leaders' success being a reflection of the team's success, I think, it's hard to measure, and we tend in education to focus more on the things we can measure, but to what extent are your team living your values, or the values you've created together, the values of your organisation, and how do you know, and really spelling out what that means and what that should look like is really important.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. Can I think build on a previous point from a different question, which was this point about shining the spotlight on others and actually the focus not being on you, the leader. I think that's really powerful and links back to what we were talking about earlier about passing the baton of knowledge, skills, experience, expertise. It's interesting. I was in a school yesterday and speaking to a really talented biology teacher who not long come back off maternity leave, real bright shining star of the profession, right? So absolutely eats, breathes, sleeps, teaching and learning. And her reluctance was, I don't feel like I should share this stuff. But she has such skill and developed her craft in such a way that would be really valuable to other people in the sector. But her reluctance around that was like, I just don't feel like my voice is important enough.
Right.
And I do really feel like networks, grassroots networks like the ones that we run, but also, there's so many others out there that provide platforms for people to share this knowledge, experience, expertise, not because it's any better than anybody else, or not because that voice should be louder necessarily, but because we owe it to each other in the sector to share this more openly. And I think that whole point, that's a leadership challenge in itself, isn't it? Is that how do you make it part of your leadership routine to amplify voices that really help us to move practice forward? Because, and we've written widely about this, and Sam has as well, we can't just think that because somebody has a different job or that they're outside of our organisation that they've got all of the answers to this. So the answers very much lie in the room. And it's important we get the confidence to be able to harvest all of that expertise. And that I think is a principal leadership challenge.
Love it. All right. We're nearly at the end.
Yeah. One more.
Okay. Time for one last ignition point, I think, Chris. I'm intrigued with this one. I mean, both the titles. I was intrigued about Mr. Money, who I now know who that guy is, and he sounds marvellous. But the title of your second ignition point is Lady with a Dog.
Yeah.
And
I know. Can you imagine
what on earth does that mean?
What is it? Clickbait, they call it, don't they? Clickbait. Where so I was talking to someone the other day about this because someone had said to me, "Oh, you're so confident, la la la," and I said, "Well, that wasn't always the case." And they said, "Oh, tell us something we might not know about you," and I was like, "Oh God, that's just, the pressure." I think they even said, "Tell us something interesting about you," which is even more pressure, isn't it? And the one that came to mind was, and I don't, people won't know this, I wouldn't have thought, but I was agoraphobic for like 6 months. So my understanding of agoraphobia is that you're scared of open spaces. Is that right?
I don't know.
I might be,
Shall I Google it?
Misdefining it. But effectively, here's the story. I was at university. I must have been stressed. I had a bad stomach. The boys who lived in my house gave me absolutely no sympathy. I go to the doctor. Was I right, Tracy?
Well, it says complex anxiety disorder characterised by an intense fear of being in situations where escape might be difficult or help unavailable.
All right.
If panic-like symptoms. Yeah, so...
Maybe something like that then.
Contrary to popular belief, it is not just a fear of open spaces, but rather a feeling of being trapped, embarrassed, helpless in public.
Interesting.
Crowded and closed areas. So, yeah.
Well, what happened for me was I go to the doctor. The doctor says, "Oh, yeah. Bad stomach. Okay, well, it could be one of three things. It could be an ulcer, it could be irritable bowel, or it could be cancer." So I'm like, okay, well, that makes me feel even worse. And then the pain got worse and all these sorts of things. I was in Portsmouth at university, so I ended up going home to my parents in Bristol. Not unknowingly at that point, it was basically linked to like psychosomatic almost, more stress, more pain, more stress, more pain, that sort of thing. Got into a vicious cycle in that I literally would wake up with this crippling stomach pain. I'd worry about it all day to the point of, oh my God, I'm never going to have a normal life. Really catastrophizing into kind of unreasonable kind of events, to the point where it lasted until I would physically pass out on an evening. I couldn't go to sleep because the pain was so distracting. I'd have to pass out. And it went on so long that I just didn't want to leave the house. And so I ended up not leaving I didn't go back to university for a while, didn't leave my parents' house for about 5 months, right? And at the end of that 5th month, one of the neighbours, who is the lady with the dog, would knock on the door every single morning and ask me to go for a walk with the dog. And every morning I'd say no, but she didn't give up. She literally knocked on the damn door every day for weeks and weeks. And it was probably only about 2 weeks until I said, okay, I'll come out for a walk with the damn dog. And I felt terrible. I don't know. It was the first time I'd experienced all that. I felt nauseous and, like kind of dizzy and all these sorts of things. But when I got back, I felt a tiny bit better. And so I went the day after that, and I went the day after that. And within a week, I was like, dude, I'm out. This is it. I cracked it. And I almost sort of took a weird approach to it after that, where I sort of went, do you know what? You're not in control of me anymore, pain. You can stick around if you want, but I'm just going to crack on with my life. So jog on. And it went away. And that was the end of that story. And every now and again, I get stomach pain, but I know that it's it's back to try and control me. And I say, you ain't getting me anymore. And so pretty much that lady with the dog, I kind of grandiosely saved my life, but who knows where it would have gone if she hadn't kept banging on the door.
Wow.
Wow. I love that. Is she related to Mr. Money?
No,
was it Mrs.
not.
Money?
No, she's not.
I think
the dog.
What's really interesting about this is what resonates for me is how good a neighbour are you? Is that phrase that we use often in the group, right? So, sometimes people can see what we need before we know that we need it, and I think that's her persistence in knocking on every day. That's quite incredible.
Yeah. Well, there we go. So sadly, we've come to the end of the This Is Your Life with Chris Baker. We need to bring that show back. That was a good show, wasn't it?
Well, great show. Had a book, big folder.
Yeah, big folder,
Yeah.
It's been a joy, just hanging out with you ladies some more. As I said, I don't underestimate your role in me being here. So I appreciate that. And it's great to mark the 50th with the first and who would have been the joint first if she wasn't having another baby.
No, Sam comes first.
Sam gets first. So let's do a little bit of promotion, as we always do. How can people connect with the two of you if they don't know you?
Sam, go first.
The usual platforms, but not that horrible hellhole one. Mostly LinkedIn these days, but mainly we would love people to come and join us at Trustwide CPD Leaders Forum if they lead professional development at scale or they aspire to in trusts or other groups of schools. It's completely free. We meet around about every month. We have various communities of practice. We've just published our first paper. It's a really great space for critical thinking, collaboration, sharing expertise, and just helping each other to do these really complex jobs that we've got. So we would love to see people there. So you can contact me or Tracy about that, and we'll get you added to the list.
Amazing.
Yeah. As above, yeah.
And Tracy, you're on LinkedIn as well?
I'm on LinkedIn. Yeah, I don't do the others so much at the moment, but LinkedIn is where it's at the moment. And the group, the Trustwide CPD Leaders, also on LinkedIn, which is where we share lots of information and updates and some of our thinking as well. So, yeah, that's the best mode of
Perfect. Well, thanks to everyone for listening as usual. We'll be back to normal next episode, so you'll be fine. We've got some crazy, exciting guests coming up, so that'll be great. And if you're interested in any of the Launchpad stuff, then give me a shout on LinkedIn or go to our
We come back for the 100th one, Chris.
Oh, that would be cool if we even get there, wouldn't it? Yeah, that would be really great.
We'll wear gold.
We'll get Mr. Money and the dog lady on.
Yes.
All right. See you later, everyone.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.